Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. Why is it that today many highly selective colleges seem to be more interested in students who are specialists or experts, or the new term angular, versus those who are generalists or jack of all trades or well-rounded? Because it used to be the opposite was true. Back in the day, highly selective schools were impressed by the proverbial well-rounded student who seemed capable of doing pretty much everything: sports and academics and playing the guitar and doing volunteer work. And the specialists were thought to be more on the fringe or too narrowly focused, or maybe they didn't have a broad enough base of curiosity to take advantage of a liberal arts education. Well, the tides have turned. Nowadays, schools appear to have swung in the other direction. Today, many admissions officers state that their goal is to assemble a well-rounded class, not a class full of well-rounded students. In other words, they want to fill their class with applicants who are extremely good at a wide variety of things. They want the world-class oboist. They want the all-American athlete. They want the champion debater, the entrepreneur. But today, these all represent individuals. This is different from looking for a candidate who is pretty good at the oboe. They play JV soccer. Maybe they spent 1 year on the debate team and sold a few things on Craigslist. That person today is not really what highly selective schools are looking for. Because the truth is, there are many kids out there just like this. They're a dime a dozen. And mind you, this is not to say that one type of student or profile is better than another. It's just what colleges are focusing on right now. In this episode of the podcast, I'd like to discuss what this means and how this new trend or this new philosophy may impact how your child might want to think about investing their time or their money and their energy during high school if they want to be competitive at some of the highly selective schools. Let's start with the old school, well-rounded student. My guess is that about 70% of the student profiles that I evaluate fall into this category. And to give you an idea of what this well-rounded student profile sounds like, here's how a typical mom would describe her son to me, who, in this case, happens to be a junior. Here we go. Oh, Phil, my son is doing very well in high school, especially academically. I'm not sure what more he could be doing. Between you and me, he's very bright. I mean, very bright. I know a lot of parents probably say that about their own kids, but his teachers tell us the same thing. Now, don't get me wrong. He doesn't get the smarts from me, maybe from his father's side, or maybe it skipped a generation. I don't know. My husband and I joke about this all the time. What I do know is that he works very hard. And right now he has a 4.112 GPA, and he's taking 2 weighted AP classes. I mean, the amount of work he gets every night is crazy. There's not a chance that I would be able to do when I was a junior what he's doing today. I can't even help him out with his homework anymore. It's way above my head. He took the PSAT last year and he got a 1290. That's the 97th percentile. We're very proud of him. And of course, like most teens these days, he's super busy. I mean, we barely even see him. He starts on JV soccer and sometimes even gets pulled up to varsity for the away games. He's a very strong athlete. I mean, he's got to be playing soccer since he's, 4 years old? His coach tells us that his soccer IQ is off the charts, and he will, I would say, definitely make varsity next year. He also plays the piano, although I have to admit we need to get him back on track there. He's kind of lost the edge a little bit there, but we're going to get back on lessons there. He does a ton with student government. He's the vice president of the Spanish club. He's on the spirit committee that organizes the prom. He's super busy with that. And I know, it sounds like there aren't enough hours in the day, but he also somehow is squeezing in volunteer work at the soup kitchen. My husband drives him down to help in the shelter at least 2 or 3 times a year. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does he fit all of this in, right? I mean, I don't know. He's just very motivated. Now, I know that the Ivy League schools are very competitive, but I can't imagine that there are too many kids out there who are doing as many things as he is and at such a high level. What do you think his chances are? Okay, now, does any of that sound familiar? Be honest. Do any of those statements ring true? I'm guilty of some of them, I'll admit it. A well-rounded student is, in fact, doing very well. They typically excel in school. They're active in extracurriculars. They participate in volunteer work. They seem like they're doing all the right things, and they are doing all the right things. And they are very busy. But, and that's a big but, so are a lot of other students in the country. This profile is quite common. There are tens of thousands of kids with 4.0 plus GPAs. There are thousands and thousands of editor-in-chief of newspapers and soup kitchen volunteers and piano players. There are a dime a dozen, especially at highly selective schools. What this means is that it's hard for an application like this to stand out from the crowd because it's too, if you will, round. These days, what gets the attention of admissions officers at the highly selective schools is not roundness, it's pointiness. Is there such a word as pointiness? I don't know. Well, that's where they use the term angular. These highly selective schools are looking for angular candidates. Candidates with parts of their profile that stick out, that are memorable, and that not every other kid seems to do. Now, sometimes this angularity comes in the form of a student who is just plain old interesting or cool or different. For instance, the student who sailed around the world by herself at age 15, or the student who has 500,000 followers and makes 14 grand a month as an Instagram influencer, or the student who did a TED Talk about how he built dozens of small modular houses for the homeless all summer. These are impressive feats by students who have gone above and beyond what's expected of even a high-performing high school student. These students have done significant and memorable things that make them angular. Angularity also comes in the form of specific institutional needs of a college. You may have heard that term before, institutional needs. For example, if a college band is in desperate need of an oboe player in order to keep the orchestra operational and fully funded, the school might take an extra close look at all of those applicants who specialize in the oboe. And if your child happens to be a renowned oboe player and in the applicant pool that year, he or she may get the nod. As we all know, being a recruited, or what we call a supported athlete, is a very angular attribute. It means that you are so good at a particular sport and that you stand out from the crowd so much that a coach is going to put an asterisk next to your name when he sends it down to admissions. And you, more times than not, will get accepted. Of course, it varies. It's not a 100% guarantee. But most coaches only have a couple of asterisks to use every year, depending on the school and the sport and the school's mission. Angular students, unlike well-rounded students, have typically focused their time and their energy and their resources on just one or two activities. And that laser focus has made them into, oftentimes, nationally or world-class performers. Ivy League and other highly selective schools, they like these students. They have obviously shown an intensity and work ethic and purpose that others in a particular field have not. It doesn't make them any better or worse than anyone else. And of course, colleges love accepting students who have high potential to go on and do great things in the world, whether that's the Olympics or the New York Philharmonic or the UN or the business world. Their goal is to put together a well-rounded class comprised of world-class angular performers from every walk of life and sport and activity and instrument and academic field. That's what they're shooting for. So what does all this mean for your child? Well, here are a few thoughts. Thought number one, think about how your son or daughter fits in the well-rounded to angular continuum. Is there something that they do that would blow away any other student? Are they the best at something in their school or their town or the city or the state or the country or the world? Or are they a typical, hardworking, smart, conscientious, 4.0 student athlete who's involved in student government? Which one is it? Or are they a tweener, somebody who's in between those two modes? Thought number 2, if they are indeed angular and have a very specific aptitude or skill that is in demand by the school they want to go to, their chances of breaking through the noise are higher. It doesn't mean that they're automatically getting in, but it does mean that the school will understand who they are and they'll be able to assess whether they need that type of student. Thought number 3, if your child is well-rounded, you will want to consider whether or not it makes sense to stay the course and stick with that wide breadth of activities with a little bit of depth, or instead to start thinking about shifting their time and attention into just 1 or 2 activities that they love and they have a high potential in. And remember, this approach can only happen in 9th or 10th grade. That's why it's so important that you are hearing and listening to this now. If you waited until 11th grade, or 12th grade even, to hear this message, it would be too late. So if this trend continues, who will be the winners and who will be the losers? Well, the winners appear to be the students who have found, either intentionally or by luck, what they love to do. They've tripled down on it, and they've risen to the highest level in that field. They've found their, if you pardon the pun, their angle. The losers, and of course, I don't really mean losers, I mean those who are less likely to benefit from this trend. They may be the students who continue to bounce around from activity to activity, demonstrating success, but with a shallow depth of engagement and low impact and really just things to potentially just fill up space on their resume. What types of angles do we see today? Well, angularity comes in many forms. Sometimes schools even have quotas to fill in some of these angularity buckets. Here are some examples of some pointy angles. Number 1, special talents. For example, published writers, authors, commissioned artists, champion coders, national level debate champions. Maybe somebody has a suite of patents already. Number 2, we've talked about this, athletes, nationally, internationally recognized athletes. Number 3, uncommon intellectual curiosity. Maybe a student who's a deep researcher, or they do cryptocurrency trading, or they're a software hacker, or they're an entrepreneur. Number 4, leadership. There are some students out there who do a lot of leadership, sometimes even culminating in the Secretary General of Model UN for the United States. And number 5, academic or test scores. These are students who get perfect SAT scores, perfect ACT scores. They're number 1 in their class. They're valedictorian. They get 5 on 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 AP exams. These are very pointy angles. And then there are some other categories that can tip the scales in admissions. Sometimes we call these categories hooks. Some hooks, for example, are a legacy hook. That's if your mother or father are alumni of the school that you're applying to. Sometimes some schools take that into account and give you a little bit of an edge because they want to keep mom and dad happy. Number 2, athletes. We talked about that. It's an angle. It's also a hook. Number 3, first-generation college students. These are students whose parents did not go to college. Number 4, underrepresented minorities. Number 5, development cases. These are cases where an applicant has a parent or parents who have donated a lot of money. We're talking millions of dollars to erect a building or a library. So admissions officers are potentially going to look at that student, that applicant, a little bit more kindly because maybe there's more money behind where that came from. Number 6 and 7, we put these two together. Celebrity parents or faculty parents. Sometimes that can be a little bit of an edge. Now, you might be thinking, my son or my daughter is so well-rounded, he or she doesn't have an angular bone in their body. Does she or he have any chance? Well, of course. First of all, being a well-rounded student is a category unto itself. It's just not a very big one, and it's, as we talked about, very competitive. And second, well-rounded students often have a gift that angular students do not. The ability to synthesize different and sometimes unrelated ideas. I like to call these students synthesizers. And when I work with students who have never specialized in anything, intentionally or unintentionally, I can sometimes help them craft an application that shows how their breadth of experiences has allowed them to synthesize ideas from a wide range of topics, something that a specialist might find hard to do. Some of the most successful people in the world have been able to connect seemingly unrelated fields in innovative ways. Perfect example is Steve Jobs. Many people have heard of Steve Jobs, who famously combined his twin talents for technology and design in building Apple computers. Maybe your child has the potential to be a synthesizer. Now, of course, there's a big disclaimer here, and hopefully it's an obvious one. I caution you not to take what you've just learned and hijack your child's life or identity and start messing around with it too much, or trying to create some kind of angular Frankenstein. Your child is likely already predisposed to being either angular or well-rounded, and that's great. Embrace it, acknowledge it. The key here is to be aware of how this system works, in case there is an opportunity for you to help guide your child as they move through high school. Sometimes well-rounded students need someone to float the idea of focusing on fewer activities. Sometimes it comes as a huge relief. Just as much as angular students can become so tunnel vision that they lose touch with the realities of life as we know it. So here's some food for thought as we wrap up this episode. Is your child more well-rounded or angular? Does it make sense for them to continue on their current path, or should they specialize in something? Should they stick with being well-rounded? Should they consider the synthesizer approach? Some of this talk is bleeding over into what some might call student branding. And by that I mean a pattern of interest or skills or passions that define, in broad strokes, who a student is, what they stand for, what they care about, what makes them tick. Now, some parents might take offense to this, and they hear the term branding and they think that it's not appropriate for teenagers, or it's too commercial sounding, or sounds overly engineered, and that's okay. I disagree with them. I believe that encouraging your child to think of themselves in terms of a personal brand is healthy, is interesting, and a useful experience. I think it promotes self-reflection and a level of self-awareness that not a lot of kids actually engage in these days. It gives them confidence if they're moving in the right direction, and a chance to shift gears if they don't really like what they see or hear. Have you thought about what type of brand your child might have as they move through high school? How would you articulate it? What words would you use? How would they articulate it? And would they like what it sounds like? Well, we address all of these questions and many more in an upcoming episode when we dive into the topic of personal branding. Okay, that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with a friend who might find it valuable, and give us a review if you so choose. Until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.